All right, hello out there in YouTube land. All right, so it looks like we have two folks with me right now. So why don't you, as you're coming aboard, if you could just maybe write in the little chat box there, let me know who is here. It says here, new, hold potentially inappropriate messages for review. That's a big concern with this group, inappropriate messages. We'll click not now. I think we'll be okay. All right, so we'll wait a few minutes and then see if we get a few more folks joining before I get going here. All right, get my papers in order in the meantime. All right. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like I've got a few of you out there and maybe a couple of more people will join, but I know there's also some folks that have already emailed me saying that they probably wouldn't be able to attend tonight, but they'll be watching on the link that I post afterwards. So, of course, that's always a good option as well. I know sometimes life gets in the way despite our best intentions. So anyways, I want to thank you for joining me this evening for our July edition of our YouTube Live. So this month, I'm really excited about our theme, which is contact. And as all of you are aware, obviously, this is such a huge deal in our dressage work and really permeates through everything that we're doing with our horses, every single movement, just, the whole thing. So I'm really excited to have this theme for this month, and there's a lot to dive into. And you've already received 2 emails about contact, and obviously I'll cover some of the topics tonight that were covered in those emails, but we have more to come. So so I hope that everybody found last month's material really useful. I know I got some really good feedback on structuring your ride. And the one thing I did want to say, I've been meaning to say for a month or two now, but if there's anything that you really want to learn about or a theme that you really want covered, and again, it doesn't just have to be like in the arena type of material, but it can be something, something about dealing with emotions, anything that can help us in our riding, not just like the technical side of it. Please email me or leave me a comment in the chat box here, because I'm always looking for new topics, and there's so much to discuss, and sometimes for me it's overwhelming trying to choose something. So if there's something that you really want me to cover, you really want more education on or more discussion on, please let me know, because I'm really happy to take suggestions. Again, I'm here for all of you guys. So if there's stuff that you want me to cover and you really want to learn more about, then I will be absolutely happy to do that. And so I encourage you to, let me know if there's something you really want to go through. All right, so just real quick before we get started here, and I'll go through the schedule again at the end, but I always like to start off going through the schedule for the month. So this month is obviously different. We have the YouTube Live on the second Monday in the month. So that means we'll have the videos, your video submissions, or your questions. If you don't have time to get to a video, no problem. I understand you need multiple people and it takes time. So, but if you can't get a video, please send me a couple of training questions, or, it can be questions about anything, again, related to riding. So it doesn't just have to be, what are my aids for the shoulder in, or, how do I prepare a flying change? It can be anything, any issue. It can be emotional, dealing with any sort of emotion, mental strategy, again, the coaching, that we cover that whole realm there. So any question that you may have about anything related to your riding or training is fair game. Okay. So that's July 15th. So basically a week from today, your video submissions and or questions. And then the following Monday, July 22nd, we will do our conference call. And next week at some point, I'll be sending out a link for that. So look for that either, both on the email and the Facebook page. I know we've got some folks that are showing fairly soon, later in this month. So keep those show reports coming. And I know Linda we showed this past weekend. Whether you like it or not, Linda, I'm going to recognize you. I know I always hated like when, if I did something like people recognize me, but too bad. we need to be recognized for accomplishments. And she had a really good show, scoring well into the upper 60s with her talented mare, doing first level. So congratulations on that, Linda. And for those of you that are showing more towards the end of the month, give me a show report, good, bad, or ugly. Whatever happens, as we talked about a couple of months ago in our show themed month, it's all good, right? If we don't quite get the scores we wanted, we learn something and we can strategize for next time. If we do well, then awesome, then great, then we bask in the glow. So get those show reports coming. And then also later in the month, I'm going to keep circling back to the goals. So I will get an email out about how things are going with your goals as well. So I really want to keep, every couple of months at least, circling back to your goals that you gave me. And there are a couple of you, maybe, I don't know if I have goals from you. So make sure when y'all first join, of course, I send out an email asking why you're doing coaching, what you want to get out of it, what your goals are. So if you haven't ever sent me what your goals are, please do send me at least one goal that you've got for this year. And that way we can just kind of keep that right at the front of our minds as the year goes on. So yeah, look for an email later on in the month. Think about how things are going with your goals and how you want to keep mapping out how to achieve those. And we'll discuss that. All right, so like I said, this month is contact. And this is probably a theme that we could do like, a full year on. And it's still not quite enough time. But we're trying to get everything here. I'm glad we're getting everything, or getting into contact, because this is such a big theme. And obviously I've already done the 2 emails about contact with young horses, and then what does proper contact look like. I'll talk a little bit more about that this evening. But the first thing I want to do is just start with a definition of contact. And the definition, one of the clearer ones that I found, was that it's the consistent connection the rider has to the horse's mouth through the reins. So this is the reason I bring this definition up, is because it's really a simplistic one. But as we know, there's really so much more to contact or connection than it's just us holding the reins, right? So really every single aspect of the training scale affects the connection. And really connection starts with the push from the hind leg, right? So it's not just really simply, okay, our contact is the physical connection between our hand and the ring of the bit, or our hand and the horse's mouth through the reins. It's this whole system, like this whole energy flow that's going through the horse. And with the training scale, everything really connects into connection. So for example, well, I'll just go through the training scale again. And we did those emails a while back, right? So we've got rhythm, relaxation, contact, impulsion, straightness, and then finally collection. Really everything in there can affect contact or connection. So the impulsion can affect the contact, whether the horse is not pushing enough or they're running. Of course, straightness can affect contact a lot. Even if the horse is out of rhythm, if the horse isn't relaxed, all these things can make a difference when it comes to contact. So I always like to think that in a way the contact is a symptom of some greater issue. The contact isn't necessarily, in a way, it's not, yes, it is a primary issue, of course, but in a way, fixing the contact is not the primary issue. There's always going to be an underlying cause, whether it's lack of impulsion, whether it's a crookedness issue. So when we're dealing with our horse's contact and we want to make it better, we always need to be thinking about what is actually the root cause, if the horse doesn't feel quite right in our hands. All right, I think that's something that, being humans, we're so used to fixing things with our hands, right? So, I mean, when we need to fix something around the house or in our car or anywhere else, we're grabbing the tools and we're using our hands to fix it. So it makes sense that when we're riding our horses, of course, that we want to do the same thing, right? If the rein, the contact in the rein doesn't feel good, then we want to fix that with our hands. But we have to remember that, as I said in the very beginning, after that simplistic definition, contact really isn't just what's happening in the reins. It's this whole flow of energy going through the horse's body, from the hocks, through their back, through the wither, up to the bit, through our reins up to the bit. So there's a lot of room there for things to happen. That's just not just in our reins. So we'll start with introducing contact. Well, actually, let's first go to characteristics of good contact, and then I'll dive more into young horse contact. And with the emails, you may be wondering, why didn't I start with the characteristics of good contact first and then go to the young horse one? The reason why was because that weekend I had taught up in Chicago, and we were really discussing, there was 2 young horses of Heidi's that we were working with specifically, and talking a lot about contact and how to introduce it. So for me, it was real timely to get that email out, get that down, on paper, so to speak. So that was out there for y'all to see with the young horse stuff and introducing contact. So if you're wondering why I did young horse contact and then overall proper contact next, that's why, because it was just a timing issue. So anyways, we will go to characteristics of good contact. First thing I have on here is that it's elastic. And I like to think of contact as like the reins, like I'm almost holding rubber bands. So to me, there should be a vibrancy to the contact, like almost a vibrating kind of feeling. I've seen it in some, like I saw in dressage today once, they have the art, like the drawing in the back of some kind of analogy. And one of them that I saw was like, it's like, pretend like when you're holding the reins, you're holding 2 broomsticks or something like that. And, in some ways I can kind of get it that you don't want to have like too much like extra play in the reins. But to me, I like the rubber band feel works better for me, because I like, if you're thinking about like the reins is like broomsticks or like a piece of metal, to me that starts to become like a really static kind of rein contact where there's not much breathing, there's not much vibrancy to it. So I always like to think of rubber bands. And when you hear, a lot of times, you'll hear characteristics of good contact, and one of them is elasticity, right? We always hear all the time, like, you want to have an elastic contact. Well, a wooden broom or a steel rod, there's no elasticity in that. But a rubber band, there certainly is. The rubber band can stretch out and then it can contract. And so in a way, that really describes our contact perfectly. With say a Grand Prix horse or an FEI horse, we should be able to let the rubber band contract, right? So this is a horse that was really being compressed together and closed together. And then we should be able to stretch that rubber band out. We should be able to lengthen the reins and lengthen the horse's frame. Or even like inside of a test, when you're riding, say, an extended trot in Prix St. George, that rubber band should stretch out just a little bit, right? So in the extended trot, extended canter, there should be a slight stretching out of the horse's frame. Okay, so I like that rubber band. That works for me. Maybe you have something else in mind that works for you, but in terms of the elasticity element, I like to think rubber band. As I mentioned earlier, contact really starts from the horse's hind legs. So in a way, we're feeling our horse's hocks in our hands. So our contact, and you read it everywhere, in the magazines and the books, on videos, when masters are describing what contact is, and it's always back to front, back to front. What does back to front mean? Well, exactly what I just said. It means that the contact actually starts from us driving the hocks forward into the hands. So it's not us taking back into the horse, it's a forward-thinking idea. Now, that doesn't mean that when I say forward-thinking idea, it doesn't mean that we throw the hands at the horse, we throw the reins away. No, we certainly don't do that. But we're also not presenting the contact to the horse by taking back on them. And in a way, good contact is a presentation. And I know that maybe not all of you have ridden with Charles or seen Charles DeCunfee, who's my mentor, but in his clinics, he always talks about that, or uses the phrase often, that it's the presentation of the bit. So he never says, you're taking back on the horse or whatever. He says you're presenting the bit. So when you present something, here it is. You're not presenting something by taking it, right? So you're not taking the bit, you're presenting it to the horse. So in a way, with contact, we should be in either a passive resistance mode, where we're not giving the reins, but we're not taking back, or a yielding attitude. There shouldn't ever be a taking back attitude, right? So it's either passive resistance, stabilizing against what the horse is doing, and this is, the passive resistance is more when the horse is not in the posture that we want, and specifically when they're coming above the bit. So there's passive resistance, and then when the horse finds the right posture, there's a yielding attitude. I'll come back to Charles, right? His big motto, or his big slogan that he always says in his clinics, is legs energize, seat modifies, reins verify. And when he talks about the reins verifying, that means the reins verify through yielding, okay? So the reins verify through yielding. Another thing that Charles talks about is that, or a phrase that he likes to use, is that we don't shape the horse, but we shape their energies. Once again, this is referring to the fact that what we're shaping, the way that we're creating this bowed up round posture, is by pushing the horse's hind legs forward into our hands. So that's how we're creating the shape of the horse. It's not by taking back. And we're not shaping, in a way, the horse itself. We're shaping their energies. We're posturing their energies. One thing that's really, really important when it comes to connection and contact is finding the appropriate neck length. Now, this is something that is really very, very tricky. And of course, you'll see both ends of the spectrum. So sometimes I'll work with riders that have the neck a lot longer than they need it to be. And so the horse is a bit strung out on the forehand and not really engaging, not bringing the hocks under their body and carrying it all. And then, of course, you'll see the opposite, where you have riders that actually confine the horse's neck too much and they get them too short. So the horse can't really seek the contact. Charles likes to compare it, like the neck that's too short, he compares it to like wearing a shoe that's way too tight. Obviously that doesn't feel good, right? There's a lot of pressure there, a lot of pain. It's the same thing when we talk about the horse's neck getting too short. So that's really uncomfortable. It's very difficult for the horse to work forward. And it's certainly not really possible for them to work over their back when the neck gets overshortened, because then everything over the top line becomes kind of frozen up. And that's, of course, the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. Another, I guess, property of good contact or proper contact is that it's fairly even in both hands. So by nature, most horses want to be heavier in the left rein than in the right rein. But every once in a while, you'll get a horse that's the opposite, and you feel them more in your right hand, not really present at all in your left hand. So those are, in human terms, most horses are like righties, and then you have a few that are like lefties, right? So most people are righties and a few are lefties. So our job as a trainer is to work diligently to get the horses even in both reins as possible. And of course, how do we do that? Well, it's straightening work. It's getting, well, first of all, why do we feel a difference in the reins? It's because the horse doesn't use their hind legs equally. So they don't push and carry equally in the two hind legs. Therefore, so what we're feeling up front is that inequality behind. Like circling back around to the beginning, when we feel problems in contact, it's usually not just a problem in our reins, right? And so this is a great example. When we feel that there's unequal weight in our hands and we need to fix that, that comes from getting the hind legs to work more evenly. And so that's really straightening work, getting the weaker hind leg stronger. So they'll start to push more with that hind leg and we'll start to feel more contact into the lighter rein. Of course, at the same time, we need to soften. The general rule is that you lighten as much as you can on the heavier rein. And you say to the horse, okay, we're not going to give you that to grab onto. Another aspect of good contact is that there should be a consistent weight in both hands. Okay, so what I just mentioned was we're talking about comparing one rein to the next. Excuse me. So we were comparing one rein to the other one. Now what I'm talking about is consistent weight into both hands. So what you'll have is so say a young horse, for example, with a young horse on 120-meter circle, you can have 75 pounds in your hands at one point as they fall forward. Then you help them balance and all of a sudden they back off and you feel 0 pounds in your hands for a moment. Then they find a pretty decent balance and move into the bridle and lower their neck and stretch a little bit. And then you feel whatever, we'll say 3.5 pounds in your hands. And then they lose their balance and fall forward and we feel 75 pounds. And then it comes back to 30 pounds. So you get the point. With young horses, it's like a moving target with the weight in our hands. Now, ideally, as we move up the levels and our horses get more educated, they get stronger, they get better onto the aids, we should feel the weight of the reins. And again, this is just a general weight in both hands, becomes more and more consistent. What you have with young horses is sometimes the rein gets really stiff in a way, and then all of a sudden you may get a loop in the reins, and then the reins get kind of tight and taut, and then you get a loop in the reins. So ideally what we want to have with our rein contact is we just have, again, this rubber band feeling. We don't have the rubber band snap where we get a big loop in the reins. We've all seen that either on our riding videos or looking in the mirror and we see a big loop. Again, normally the right rein, but sometimes the left one. So what we want to see is just this kind of steady, almost like vibrating type of feeling on both reins. But there is some weight in our hands. Dr. Hillary Clayton did a study up at Michigan State University where they put some sensors on side reins and lunged horses. And what they found was that pretty much every horse, and again with the side reins, the horse basically takes the weight that they want to take. And they found that they basically all fell within taking basically or putting 2 to 5 pounds of pressure onto the bit and onto the side reins. So that's for the most part, when the horse is properly connected, we're going to have them in that 2 to 5 pound range. Of course, some of them want to be a little bit heavier, a little more present in the contact. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, just like some of them want to be a little bit lighter. That doesn't mean it's wrong. The biggest thing is that you're finding consistency. So again, we want to avoid that, that snapping of the rubber band to then really tight to snapping. That's the contact that we're trying to avoid, is that kind of inconsistency. I put on here that I had this issue happen once at a show where I was riding a horse in the warm-up, and he generally took a fair amount of weight in my hands. So if anything, I wanted him to be a little bit lighter. And as I was trotting him around, it was right before I got rung in, to start my test. And all of a sudden I felt nothing in my hands. And at first I was like, well, that's not such a bad thing. It's nice that he's nice and light. And then I thought to myself, no, this isn't right. This horse is never this light. So fortunately, Jenna was able to be kind of up by the arena there, just outside the fence, and she could see that he got the tongue, or gotten the bit under his tongue, and so of course then he wouldn't let me touch. He wouldn't put any weight into the bit because it was going to be really painful. So I had to trot him over, and by this time the bell had rung, so I had 45 seconds to get in the arena. And although at that point, yeah, it was 45 seconds. So basically I had to scramble over to the fence, have Jenna stuff the horse's tongue or stuff the bit back over the horse's tongue, and then get in there and ride a test. And it all turned out well. But I thought that was just kind of a funny story and a little bit of panic there. But again, it was just an illustration of like I had nothing in my hands, and in a way we could be like, oh, this is wonderful. But for me, I'm like, no, that's not correct. That there should be something in my hands, and for this horse to go from like kind of he's a little heavy on the heavy side to absolutely nothing in my hands, I knew something wasn't quite right. And sure enough, yeah, he got the tongue over the bit. So yep. So if you ever feel that, if you're ever riding and all of a sudden like you have nothing in your hands and you can't get anything in your hands, very good chance that that tongue is over the bit, because that's exactly what will happen. Is they obviously they just completely slink away from the pressure of the bit because it causes pain. It's like if you put like a really kind of nasty curb on them, you'll see that in some other disciplines, and all the horses don't touch, they don't touch the bit. So that's what we want to avoid. That's not contact. That's not connection. As I talked about, good contact is really a combination between passive resistance and yielding. And when we talk about this passive resistance aspect, I want to point out that contact, that the whole idea of contact is to connect it down through our seat. So really in a way, and another thing that Charles likes to say, it's kind of funny, but like that the horse should feel our seat in its mouth, meaning that anytime we give the horse a rein aid, they're feeling something happening down through our seat bones. Okay. So for example, if we give a half halt, say the horse is starting to run and get a little strong, and we give them a half halt, not only do we feel that in our upper body, our elbows, a little bit in our hands, but we should feel, or the horse should feel, increased weight down into its back. So then what happens is over time, your half halt becomes just more and more from the seat. So sometimes, people are like, well, how do I get my, what does it mean when the horse is on my seat? Well, that's what it means, is that basically you can start just using your lumbar back, kind of, in a way, bracing your lumbar back or resisting with it. And that almost starts to become your half halt. So then you get more and more out of the reins. But of course, like with a baby horse, a 3-year-old, they don't get that. So you do have to use the reins a little bit, but always within reason. That's something I just wanted to point out with contact is, again, it's not just us holding the reins, but it's really like connection is a whole thing through our whole body, and it's a whole thing through the horse's whole body. Yeah, so it's not just isolated to our hands, the reins, the horse's mouth, and the bit. Of course, good contact creates a supple pole and neck so that the horse's energy can come through unencumbered to the bit. In a way, though, and oftentimes I'll hear from riders, or they'll ask me the question, again, coming back to neck length, or even just like, how do I know when I'm like my horse's neck is right and they really are in a correct contact? And the thing I always come back to, I have these questions myself when I'm riding sometimes. Oh, do I have this horse's neck in the right length or the right elevation, or is it round enough or too round or whatever? Is I always just think about, what am I feeling under my seat bones? In a way, the point of good contact is really to get the horse to use their back in a more effective manner. So we want to feel underneath us a nicely undulating back, right? We don't want to feel a back that's frozen solid or that's so stiff that it's jettisoning, easy for me to say, us out of the saddle. We want to feel that the horse's back is swinging, it's undulating, it's inviting us into its back. If you have that feeling in the horse's back, then I can guarantee you 100% that your contact is good. Because a horse that is tight in the neck, that's not accepting the contact, that's not through the neck the right way, they will not use their back right. Even the most naturally supple and elastic horse. If they're not through their neck correctly, then the whole rest of the top line doesn't quite function. It doesn't transmit the energy correctly. All right. So if you ever have questions about that when you're riding on your own, you can always just come back to, okay, how does the horse's back feel underneath my seat bones? And if it feels good, then guess what? You're totally in the right direction. Now, does that mean maybe you could shorten the rein a little bit and challenge them up a little more? Sure, maybe. So okay, go ahead and try it. And same thing. If you feel like the back still feels really nice, then cool. Then you're totally in the right direction. One other visualization that I want to give you as far as connection, I just talked about how we integrate our whole body into the contact. So if you've ever ridden with Charles or watched his clinics, you'll see him use a lot with the whole torso. So a lot with the shoulders, right? So there's kind of this effect, which there should be because the horse's shoulders are moving this way. But another visualization I want to give you is that, in a way, visualize that you're not holding the reins with your hands, rather you're holding the reins with your elbows. Okay, so basically the forearm and the hand is just an extension of the rein, and then the reins are really hooked into your elbows. And it's an interesting feeling when you have that visualization. It really makes you so much more aware of your elbow positioning. So I know some of you, when I teach you, there's a lot of talk or reminders about your elbows. Take that visualization into your next ride, and you might have some really good results with that, because it really gets you thinking about those elbows and just make you more aware and more on top of the elbow positioning. And by the way, as I'm going through this, if you have, I'm almost at the end of my list as far as good contact characteristics of good contact, but I mean, there's still probably hundreds of more characteristics of good contact. If y'all have any that like pop into your mind that I haven't covered, please go ahead and let me know in the little chat box there, and we can talk about those as well. But those are most of the characteristics that I came up with off the top of my head. Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is it really is about helping the horse find this bowed up top line and really getting the horse over the back. So I'll use like the tightening of the bowstring analogy a lot when I teach, but you can think about it as the horse's top line. Or if you've ever seen Charles in his clinics, he'll take a whip and kind of, he'll hold the front end kind of a little bit higher, and then he'll take the back end and kind of pull it under like this. And that's that tightening of the bow. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. But that tightening of the bow has to start with the back end, so the bottom part of the whip coming under, and then the presentation of the bit helps bow up the front end. All right, so it has to start with the back end coming under. So that's what we're trying to do with the horse's posture here, is create this tightening of the bowstring. And when you're able to successfully do that, then you have the horse's back up, you have the horse's back swinging, and little by little over time, this bowstring gets pulled tighter and tighter. Okay, so we're going to talk about young horses here in just one moment. Of course, with young horses, the bowstring, while we want the bow to be tightened, it's very, very mildly tightened. And then with the Grand Prix horse, we want that bowstring to be tightened a lot. We want that bow really, really tightened up. Whereas with the young horse, the bow is more like this. Okay, so we're not riding our young horses or expecting them to be in a pre-St. George kind of compression. Okay, so yeah, those are properties of good contact. And like I said, there's hundreds of more ways that you can describe good contact, but that's just some that popped into my mind and some that I think about, different visualizations and stuff. So some of you have young horses, and introducing contact, it's one thing when you get on a horse that is, say, 12 years old and has been under saddle for 8 or 9 years, and they already have a pretty good grasp of what contact is, and it's just kind of our job not to mess it up. Young horses, it's a whole different ball game, and to me, it's always kind of exciting, but it's also, in a way, it's a little scary, because with baby horses, we really have a great responsibility where it's like raising children, right? You're giving them the foundation that they're going to have for the rest of their life, good or bad. So we have that responsibility to give them a good foundation, because the things that they learn as 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, that's going to stick with them the rest of their life. So introducing contact to young horses is really, really crucial. Now, our philosophy is that before we even sit on their back, we like to lunge them. And I think most, people that start young horses do some form of lunging. But when we lunge our horses, our young horses, we like to put them in either side reins or Vienna reins. So what are those? Well, side reins basically just attach from the ring of the bit to, somewhere on the saddle, whether it's around the billet straps of the girth, or you can put it up higher if you've got a horse that, takes their neck too low. Vienna reins, they actually go from the girth up through the chest, through the rings of the bit, and then back to the girth. So the Vienna reins are a little different, but you've got the same goal with both the Vienna reins and the side reins, and that's to get the horse to, go from this kind of flight state to dropping the neck and starting to seek the contact. Oh, that reminds me, one other visualization that you can use for what good contact is that the horse is plugging into the contact. So getting back to the talk about the proper neck height, if you feel like your horse isn't plugging in, so it's like, plugging in some prongs on a electrical line into an outlet, if you don't get that feeling in your hands, then there's a good chance your horse's neck needs to be a bit lower and maybe even a bit longer. Okay, so that's just something that popped in my head when I was talking about the side reins. So with the side reins or the Vienna reins, we want to teach the horse, before we even get on their back, how to plug into the contact. Now again, we have a lunge whip, right? So we're teaching the horse, we have these side reins that are set, right? The side reins don't pull back against the horse. The side reins present the bit, keyword, present the bit, and we drive them into the contact with our lunge whip. And sometimes we have to do that pretty forcefully at first. So the horse learns with the side reins, to feel contact, right? So to me, it'd be pretty scary if the first time they feel any contact is when you're sitting on their back, because you don't know exactly how they're going to respond. Some horses respond great. Others, when you apply the side reins for the first time, you have to be super, super careful and just, inch by inch by inch, tighten them, because they can get really claustrophobic. So I always want to know that before I sit on a young horse's back, that they've already felt some contact on their mouth. So when I take up the reins, it's not a huge shock and surprise. They're already going to have enough shock and surprise just feeling my weight, feeling my legs, and all that. So I want to make sure that they're comfortable with feeling some weight on the ring of the bit. So they learn to feel contact and not be shocked by it. And then, like I said, by pushing them forward with the lunge whip, they learn that, again, contact starts from them driving forward from behind into a passively resisting, steady contact. And then, of course, and it's always so interesting to watch young horses on the lunge line with the side reins for the first time, because they go through this little process. They pull up against the side reins, and then they drop their nose for 1 second, and then they pull up, and and then little by little you see the gears shifting in their mind, and they start to stay down more and more and more until all of a sudden they're just kind of like, they're just there. Because they know if they come up, they feel the pressure, they feel the resistance from the side rein, they have the whip driving them. And if they drop down, then all that pressure is released. So horses figure that out really, really quickly. Now, I want to caution you, if you're starting a young horse, to be very conservative with side rein length. So always start on the longer side, like pretty much where you don't have any contact at first, and then gradually shorten them up more and more and more. But the key aspect with the use of the side reins is the horse has to think forward. If they start to back off, that's when we get into danger. And it's the exact same thing when you're on their backs. With baby horses, first and foremost, they have got to go forward. And the most dangerous thing on a young horse is one that's sucking back and behind the leg, refusing to go. Those are the scary ones. So the same thing on the lunge line. Get them going, get them moving. Always, err on the quicker side. My philosophy, our philosophy in our barn is that whenever our horses have their tack on, they're always working in the proper posture. And this, of course, goes for young horses as well that haven't even had a rider on their back. If the horse is being lunged and they have a saddle on, then I want them to work in the proper posture, because we're always working on creating the proper muscle memory. So I always want the horse in the right shape. With young horses, now, as I talked about earlier, with young horses, you're going to have a lot of inconsistency in the contact. Now, why is this? So why is it that, our Pre-St. George, our 13-year-old Pre-St. George horse stays pretty darn steady in the bridle, and then we get on our 3-year-old after we hop off the PSG horse, and all of a sudden it's like, I can't get a horse on the bit. I don't know what I'm doing with the contact. Well, it's not that you don't know what you're doing with the contact. It's that young horses have a very difficult time maintaining the correct posture. So in the email, I likened coming onto the bit, rounding and bowing the top line to, like for us, doing a plank. So there's a lot of engagement of the core muscles. And of course, for young horses, doing this plank is really difficult. And the way that they get out of the plank is by throwing the neck up and then hollowing the back. So it makes a lot of sense then that with baby horses, they can only hold the plank for so long before then they come up, and then they can hold the plank again and then they come up. So there's definitely a weakness factor. Also, in addition to that, what you'll notice oftentimes with baby horses or this can go to green, it can be a 12-year-old green horse that's just coming into dressage, not just baby horses, but also green horses, that when you're going down the long side, when you're going straight ahead, you might feel actually pretty decent contact, pretty steady. The neck is nice and low, they're swinging. And then as soon as you come up into the corner of the short side, the neck comes straight up, the horse speeds up, the horse falls in. It's like you're riding two different horses. The reason for that is that the young horses or green horses that have just been introduced to dressage, they don't know how to bend. They don't bend well. They don't have any lateral suppleness. So when you take them through bending lines, of course, they have to stiffen because they don't know how to bend yet, and so they can't really follow their line of travel. So they lose balance, and the way they try to correct for the loss of balance is to bring their neck up and help themselves with their neck. As our young horses start to bend more and more and get more laterally supple, then again, that actually creates much more consistency in the bridle. So we've got two things at play. We've just got a lack of strength, pushing power, and just lack of strength in their core in general. And then we also have a lack of lateral suppleness. And that's why with young horses, we've got this effect of like, it's good, it's not good, it's good, it's not good. And over time, it just starts to kind of even out and get really steady and really, really nice. With young horses, we talk more about acceptance of the contact versus throughness. So with our more advanced horse, when we talk about throughness, that means that there's nothing in their body that's blocking the energy flow. So we've got this beautiful swing in the back, the poll is supple, the neck is supple, the jaw is soft, everything, soft in their eye. Everything is just swinging and undulating, and the energy is it's just this beautiful flow of energy from the hock to the bridle, back to the hock. With young horses, we don't quite have that. And again, I just explained why, because they just don't have the ability to maintain that posture in a way, or have the amount of lateral suppleness that they can have the energy going through from their hocks up into the hand through a totally supple and liquid top line all of the time. It comes and goes. What we call this is acceptance of the contact. Our young horses, we want them to accept the contact. And then as we come along, generally in our dressage tests, the word throughness doesn't really show up until second level. All right, so even at training and first level, really in the description, they talk about acceptance of the contact instead of throughness. Okay, so with young horses, we want acceptance. So that doesn't mean we want them running around, like a giraffe, head straight up in the air, mouth wide open, eyes bugging out of their head. That's not acceptance. But we don't expect them to be just down onto the bit and just rolling along with no interruption to that. We expect a little bit of that. I'm round, I'm not round, I'm round, I'm not round. And also with baby horses, sometimes you'll see them go the opposite way where they hide a little bit. That's oftentimes when they get tired. And same thing even with more mature horses. When they get tired, they'll start to drop down sometimes, and then you'll feel too light in the contact. All right, so that's a little bit with young horses. But I guess the moral of the story with young horses is you want to start teaching them proper contact right from the start. You don't want to wait until they're fairly strong at 5 years old to now all of a sudden start expecting them to come nice and round onto the bit. Okay, so start right from the beginning. And you'll be amazed what young horses, how they can come along. They can actually come along pretty quickly with the contact if you introduce it in a good way. Oh boy, still a lot to go through. 15 minutes. All right, we're gonna roll here. All right, so with more mature horses, as I said, as their strength increases, you're going to find that they're going to become more consistent onto the contact. Right, so you're going to get less of that up and down, and also weighting of the reins. You're going to get less of the heavy contact, no contact, that kind of thing. They're just going to start to plug in, right? Using that analogy again, they're going to plug in. Also, over time, the horse's frame will start to become taller and shorter. Now, the key with this is as you shorten and elevate the frame is that they still stay through their back, okay? So they have to keep their swinging back. If you lose that, then again, you really probably need to lower the neck a little bit, help them get that swing in. The amount that you can raise the horse's neck is in direct proportion to how much weight they can take behind. So with a baby horse, they can't take much weight at all. So low neck. Grand Prix horse is doing piaffe passage, pirouettes, one-tempies, and the like. That neck is going to be pretty darn high. But even with a Grand Prix horse, you have to make sure they swing through the back. We can never sacrifice that for elevation of the frame. Now, we're talking about throughness. So our more advanced horses are laterally and longitudinally supple. So their back bends both in the longitudinal fashion and the lateral fashion, okay? And with baby horses, really the backs don't bend at all like that, right? There still is a great importance also in varying the frame length. So as I talked about earlier, we should be able to stretch the rubber band and ride a beautiful stretchy trot circle. And ideally with a more advanced, say, FEI horse, we should be able to contract the rubber band and bring the horse into a taller frame, all the while with a swinging back. The nose should be at or in front of the vertical, ideally. Behind the vertical, if you look at the horse as like a teeter-totter in a way, and when they come behind the vertical and overflex, that brings the hind end up and the front end down. Okay. Now, that's not to say that when you stretch the horse, of course, you're going to bring their neck down and they're going to get a little bit more tipped forward. That's okay. Stretching is an exercise into itself where you're kind of testing the contact to see if the horse plugs in and follows it. And also, it's nice just to give them a break and lift their back. Okay. But in general, when you're working the horse up to the contact, they should be the nose at or in front of the vertical. You'll see sometimes even with like international, Grand Prix horses, where you'll see a picture or a video where they're in piaffe, they're overflexed behind the vertical, and I can almost guarantee you 100% that horse is going to be actually croup high in their piaffe. You'll see that quite often. So the nose needs to be out a bit, then the pole comes up. As I talked about earlier with the mechanics of the half halt, the contact should get more and more plugged into the seat over time, and specifically how you use your lumbar back. So a bigger swing for more length of stride, we'll say, and then kind of a resisting of the lower back, which comes from the abs when we're half halting or when we're collecting. So over time, the connection becomes more and more plugged into our seat. I had here also a note about when we introduce the double bridle. That's generally, when you look at our dressage test, you can first use the double bridle at third level. And so that, of course, means that the horse is moving through, right? Because second and third level, now we're talking about throughness instead of just acceptance of the contact. So we don't do double bridles with young horses. We really don't do the double bridle until the horse is moving nicely through. So very, very consistent, fairly even weight in both reins, and a really reliable back to front connection. If the horse is backed off at all, do not introduce the double because you're asking for trouble. Ah, look at that. Rhymed. That was beautiful. Sometimes these things happen on accident, right? I also had a note here about bits. In general, it's not a hard and fast rule, but like in our barn with horses that maybe have a little duller mouth, and we want a little more play in a way, we use more loose ring bits, snaffles, and then with a horse that's, say, a little more unsteady in the contact, we may go with like a D ring or an egg butt. So you can certainly play around with bits. The most important thing with contact, of course, is how we use our hands, but sometimes changing a bit can make a difference. We already talked about the lower neck versus the higher neck issue, and that, again, it all comes down to the backswing. And when it comes to, I talked about earlier with the study by Dr. Clayton, Hillary Clayton at Michigan State, with how much weight the horses take or how much they want to take. It's kind of like a handshake, right? You meet some people where it's like you shake their hand and your hand is sore for the next half hour. And then other folks, you're like trying to like find their hand because they almost don't want to give it to you. Horses are the same. You have some horses that are like they're present in the contact, and you have some that like you're kind of searching for any weight. Neither one is necessarily wrong. Now, obviously, if the horse is totally down in your hands and running, that's not right. But if a horse is, still, we'll say, balanced, but you have a little more weight compared to another horse that you ride that has less, they can both be totally correct. The main thing is that they are consistent and that there is some weight. So a horse that's like overflexed and there's nothing in your hands, we don't want that. And then a few evasions, and this will be my next email coming out this coming Sunday, or I have here common problems. One of them we just talked about was the heavy contact, right? And that's a horse that's basically using the bit as a fifth leg and leaning into the rider's hand. So we'll see this oftentimes. What accompanies this is that the horse wants to run. So basically what they're doing is, instead of stepping under, engaging their hocks and taking weight, they're just pushing their hocks out behind and running onto their forehand. We might mistake that, or you won't now, but an uneducated observer might look at that horse and say, hey, that's a good active horse. They're forward, they're in front of the leg, but really they have zero impulsion because all they're doing is running off of their hind legs. And a horse with impulsion has engagement. So horses that are heavy, how do you go about fixing that? Well, there's this 3-step process where you slow down. So half halt, sit back, give the hand, empty out the contact, and then send them forward. So you're setting them back on their hind leg first, then you're saying by giving, you carry yourself, and then you send them forward again. With these types of horses, though, you'll have to just repeat that over and over and over. It's not going to be I do that once and the horse is magically up and light and carrying themselves. No. When they learn to kind of go in that way and lean on the hand, it'll be some work. It'll be some diligence and patience, and you just have to do hundreds, if not thousands, of those little half halt, give, go forward actions. Now, I'll describe all these evasions. I'm almost out of time here, so I'll describe all these in more detail in the email that I'm sending out, but I just wanted to go through them real quick here. Then you have some horses that are braced, right? So this is honestly what we probably see the most, is the horse that inverts the neck up, comes up like a giraffe. And then you see that big underneck, a big ugly underneck muscle starts to kind of pop out. That's generally what you see the most. Why do horses do this? Well, so the heavy horse wants to run to disengage. The horse that braces up and goes above the bit, they want to hollow their back so that they can disengage their hind legs. With these horses, oftentimes I find it's a lateral suppleness issue. So horses that like to brace above the bit, I like to go 2-track work. And a lot of times, especially if they're really braced, I'll go to 2-track work on a circle. So shoulder in, hunches in, and of course, then you can use the variations of hunches out, shoulder out, half pass, all that good stuff, spiral in, spiral out. So it can also be on a single track. And then sometimes also it can be an impulsion issue. So if you have a horse that's braced and they're real slow in their hind leg, sometimes just kind of getting that hind leg popping forward more actively will start to create that bowing up process. So it could be either an impulsion or a bending issue. Then horses again, that's where you want to, I think for the most part, drive those horses forward. So a lot of times that's a horse that's just backed off. That energy flow isn't quite coming out to the bit quite strong enough. So I like to go with basically drive them into that contact. Every once in a while, a lot of times that'll work. Sometimes you get a horse that you drive them and they just stay there and come back out. Those horses, you can also do that 3-step process that I just talked about, that, okay, now we're going to slow way down, throw the hands at them and drive them into it. That's another thing. Also with those guys, sometimes what I like to do is take the reins in both reins in one hand, because every once in a while they're backing off, because when we have the reins in 2 hands, it's actually creating too much play. So with horses, and I'll do this often in my clinics, if a horse kind of doesn't want to reach out to the contact, I'll say to the rider, okay, take both reins in one hand. And almost always when we do that, they come right up to the contact. So that's something you can try too if you can't get them to really take contact. I always remember Scott Hassler would say in his clinics, he used to be the National Young Horse Coach, and he would say, you want your horses to be like AT&T, reach out and touch someone. So, yep, they need to put some weight into our hands. Also, we'll get, as I talked about, we'll get uneven contact where you have one rein, normally the left rein, much heavier than the other one. And then you'll also get tilting. You can actually go hang. You're also going to have an inequality in the weighting of each rein. Most horses will tilt more to the right. Why? Because they want to grab that left rein and they want to empty out the right rein. So how do we go about fixing tilting? Well, it really is a straightness issue. It's the hind legs aren't working evenly. So for example, with a horse that does the classic tilt, which is they grab the left rein and they pull their nose to the right, there are lots of shoulder and left. Any exercise that's going to get their left hock under their body, help them to hollow left and let go of the left rein, and then put more weight into the right hand. That's what we want to do with that tilting issue. And of course, if they tilt to the left, then it's opposite sort of strategy. But the tilting, honestly, if you have that, yes, it's a problem. Obviously, you lose a lot of points in a dressage test if your horse tilts. So it's a big problem. But the fix for it is creating a more even, laterally supple horse. Okay, so the tilting is a symptom, as is the unevenness. Now, the general rule with unevenness is that you soften on the rein that's heavier, and you try to maintain as much stability as you can on the rein that they don't want to take. All right, so those are some common problems. But like I said, this weekend, Sunday or Saturday, whenever I get to it, look for the email about evasions into those a little bit more in depth than what I just did. But that's those are your basic main problems with contact. All right, so I just want to finish up before I take a couple of questions, if you have any, with some quotes by different masters about contact. All right, so I kind of already talked about this one from Charles de Kunfi, but we feel the hocks in our hands. So we feel the hind legs in our hands. From Thomas Ritter, who is a trainer out in, I believe, Oregon, but German by descent. Pole flexion is not pull flexion. I love that one. So pull is not pull flexion. Getting back to the idea that we're not taking back in connection. This one from Nuno Oliveira that I love as well. Acceptance of the bit happens in the haunches, not in the mouth. Okay. Acceptance of the bit happens in the haunches, not in the mouth. This one also from Oliveira. The hands have to be like concrete when the horse resists and like butter when he yields. So that's getting back to that passive resistance, softening attitude. So, and oftentimes when we're riding, we have to go back and forth between the two like that. It's got to be lightning. As soon as the horse accepts the posture and bows up, we have to immediately soften our hands. So the horse gets that affirmative, that good feeling when they give us the proper answer. But I think that's like super clear, you know, like be like concrete when the horse is not so good, but then soft and giving when they are. This is one I already gave as well. Gosh, I thwart myself sometimes. We don't shape the horse, we shape their energies. And that's from Charles. And then also from Charles, the reins are used for alignment of the shoulders, not artificially shaping the neck. So he's talking about that we use the reins more for aligning the shoulders to the haunches instead of playing with them, seesawing, that kind of stuff, trying to get the horse around. And that's another issue too. I've had some students in the past come to me with horses that have real loose necks. And again, that's not correct. You want your horse to be steady into the bridle, not braced, but also not where they're just kind of like, maybe some of you have ridden that before and it's not a very nice feeling. If you know what proper contact is, which you are all learning. All right, so I thought those were just some interesting quotes and they kind of highlight some of those different issues we talked about. All right, so that's the content that I have for today with contact. Again, we could probably do this for 5 straight months and still not cover it all, but trying to condense it all and give all the highlights here. But I'll have more information on the next 3 weeks. Yeah, we have 3 more emails left dealing with contact. So I'll open up the floor to y'all now. Does anybody have any questions? So type away if you have any questions. More than happy to answer. You know I love questions. I'll take a second and breathe. All right, no questions? No problem. And for those of you that are watching this on tape delay, if you have questions, of course, you can't get them to me in real time, but you can certainly email me after you watch the YouTube Live. So just because you're not here in the present moment doesn't mean that you can't get your questions answered, okay? So, all right, well, if there's no questions, then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, just a real quick review of our schedule for the month. Next Monday, a week from today, get those videos for evaluation, or if you can't get a video, get your questions in. So 2 training questions that are pertinent to what you're going through with your training right now. And again, it doesn't just have to be technical. It can be dealing with emotions, strategizing, how to, anything that goes on with your training. A week after, so 2 weeks from today, the 22nd, we'll have a conference call. And then, like I said, I want to get those show reports. So if you're showing this month, I want to hear about it. So send me an email. Let me know how it's going, because I like to recognize those that are getting out there and doing good work. And then also, like I said, look for an email at some point, probably later in the month. I'll be checking in about your goals so we can keep chatting and keep your goals on the front of our mind. All right, so we keep that going. All right, well, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I know this contact is such a big, in a way, sometimes mysterious concept. So I hope that tonight's YouTube Live and the emails that I'll be sending out will, help you to understand it just a little bit more. I know, and I'm sure I can speak for Jenna as well, that, even myself being a professional for, at least 15 years now, I've lost count. I know, like, I learn more about contact every day. So, like, my idea of contact has changed from, say, a year ago this time. So it's one of those things that, because we're talking about a living, breathing art, our idea or our feel of it is constantly changing. And the same thing will happen with your feel for contact as well. But hopefully here you got a few good guidelines and you can take them back into your writing. And as always, whenever you come across any sort of challenges, you have questions in your writing and your training, please don't hesitate to email me. Okay, so I hope everybody has a wonderful week. I hope you all step into your brilliance. I know that you will. I don't have to hope. I know that you'll step into your brilliance. And yeah, get those video submissions or emails in. And I look forward to getting back to you with my evaluation. And if I don't hear from you other than that, I will see you all hopefully on July 22nd for our conference call. So everybody have a wonderful evening, a great week ahead. And yeah, step into your brilliance. All right, night, everybody.